Hello, and welcome to another episode of Words and Bubbles. Today on my countdown is number 3, and the book I've chosen is Batman Superman, World's Finest, Strange Visitor by Mark Waid and Dan Mora. It's the second trade paperback of the series. So yay, finally a book that feels like a superhero book. I mean, I know I had Daredevil last time, and Danger Street with its large cast that included more than a few superheroes, not least of which was Batman, a little while before that. Actually, Batman might have been least of which there, as he was only in it for, I think, 2 pages. Anyway, those didn't really feel like superhero books. It could be argued that most superhero books these days don't feel like superhero books. And by that I mean books in which larger-than-life heroes in brightly coloured costumes battle larger-than-life villains who are similarly attired. Books in which there is no moral complexity. The good guys are wholly good, and the bad guys are wholly bad. And the issues of the day, I mean those issues in the real world, are left completely alone. And I'm not bemoaning that. I like the fact that the genre has grown over the years, gotten more complicated and nuanced. I like that Marvel grounded things a bit in the 60s, with characters like Spider-Man and Daredevil. I like that things generally got a bit darker in the 80s and 90s, with things like The Dark Knight Returns and Swamp Thing. I like that, at the same time, Watchmen deconstructed the genre. I also like that these trends have all continued, in different ways until today. It means that we, as consumers, are spoiled for choice, which can only be a good thing. Still, with all that choice, with all that depth and darkness and deconstruction available, with all those heroes tackling issues we all face and battling their own inner demons, it's nice to know that there are still books like World's Finest out there. Good fun books, with heroes being heroes and villains being bad, but the sort of generic bad that doesn't descend into being properly evil, because as I said, these books are good and fun. And what better heroes to star in such a book than Batman and Superman? I would say arguably the 2 most iconic superheroes in existence, except who would be arguing against that point? So that's essentially what this title is. DC has teamed their 2 most famous characters and an all-star creative team that includes Mark Waid, a veteran writer who has worked on just about every superhero over the years, Dan Mora, a young artist who could well be the best DC has at the moment, and Tamra Bonvillain, whose colours are at once traditional and somehow contemporary. So, a world's finest creative team taking on the duties of bringing the world's finest superheroes to life, if you will. And what have they delivered? Well, a pretty good book that brings together all the things we like about Superman and Batman, while leaving out all those things we don't. The story starts a number of years in the past of DC's current Prime Earth continuity, which is great, as so much about the Dark Universe's alternative timelines, complex storylines, and even the deaths and inevitable resurrection of characters can be ignored. Meaning that anyone with even a cursory knowledge of these characters can jump right into issue 1 and know what's happening. As a bonus for us who have kept up to date, these stories take place in a classic period for these characters. The exact time frame isn't given, but it mirrors somewhere towards the end of DC's Silver Age, or near the beginning of its Bronze. Both Superman and Batman are established heroes in this world, who have made the allies they are famous for having, and have battled the foes they are famous for battling. But this is a simpler time. Batman is still on his first, and in my opinion best Robin, Dick Grayson, rather than his, 5th in the regular continuity? Superman hasn't married Lois yet, never mind having a child with her, who grew up in an alternate dimension where time moved faster. The Justice League has just formed, but it's still on its first incarnation, so no Jarro, or Ambushbug, or Detective Trimp, or Green Lanterns beyond Hal Jordan. So yes, simple. And if you want a monthly fix of DC heroics without all the convoluted histories, there is nothing better. Same thing for the villains. They are either new, like the Devil Nezar, the near 4,000-year-old Chinese warlord, the pair defeat in their first story arc, who has since made a big splash on DC's continuity, or villains like the Joker, Metallo, and Felix Faust, who have been plaguing heroes for so long that most are probably familiar with them. And even if you're not, the plotlines don't delve deep enough into their histories for that to be much of a problem. Something else I like is that, because this book takes place earlier than the rest of DC's continuity, it doesn't have any crossovers. plenty of guest appearances, sure, but that's also a good thing, because who doesn't like to see Doom Patrol or the Teen Titans or Flash or Wonder Woman appear alongside our heroes? But no actual crossovers, which means no having to buy a title you don't normally read just to see what happens to the characters from the title you do. And also, none of the different qualities and styles of writing and art that comes from having multiple creative teams tell the same story. Also, there's none of the build-up we typically see before a big crossover. No revealing just enough to entice readers into buying the crossover without actually getting to the meat of the story. No what feels like hurry up and wait. Instead, with this title, every issue, even the standalones, feel like they are the meat of the story. That they are the story that has been built up to. That they are the culmination, the climax, the Super Bowl or WrestleMania or Avengers film or World Cup final. Then, next month's issue is released, and it feels the same way. So that's enough for the general setup. Classic heroes at their classic-est, fighting villains who are likewise classic, or brand new but in the mold of classic villains. What about this book in particular? The second story arc. To start with, some more good news. You don't really need to read the first to follow what's happening here. True, it starts with Robin working in a circus in Corto Maltese, an island off the coast of Argentina, in 1892. Which might not be where one would expect a Batman and Superman title to start. And there's no previously on page to explain how he got there, but it's easy enough to pick up on the gist of what happened by just reading the first issue. For those for whom that isn't enough, I can tell you, he was lost in time when he and Supergirl went back in time to find a way of defeating the Devil Nezza. The villain I mentioned was the bad guy in the first trade. Anyway, so lost in time means stuck in 1892. He has sent a message to Batman. Robin's in the past, so he knows that anything he writes will get to the future eventually. And he knows that Batman will come for him because, well, he's Batman. And travelling 130 years into the past really isn't a big deal for Batman. At least it isn't for this bigger-than-life Batman. Still, Batman hasn't arrived yet and Robin needs to eat, so he's joined a circus. While there's a mystery to solve, because of course there is. A couple of circus workers have been killed, apparently by animal attacks, so suspicion immediately falls on the circus animals, the lions and bears. But Robin isn't sure it's them. Anyway, I won't say any more about this as it's not important to the rest of the story, other than to say it's a fun little interlude, and that Robin gets saved by the end. Oh, there is one other thing, which I freely admit is unimportant and has no bearing on the wider story. But it did get to me a bit. There is a lion in the story, with a big, thick mane, that both Batman and Robin refer to as Girl and Her. Now I could just accept that Travis Moore, who did interior art for this issue alone, didn't know that it's the males who have manes when he did the art, or that Mark Waid didn't know when he wrote the dialogue. But how can that be? Isn't that the sort of thing that everybody knows? What's more, if either were true, the editors must have also missed it, which seems unlikely. So we're left with 4 primary possibilities. Either only male lions having prominent manes is not a fact that's as widely known as I assumed. Or 2. In the DC Comics universe, all lions have manes. Which seems the sort of stupid fact that I would know. Or 3. Both Batman and Robin got it wrong. Which seems very unlikely as they are both geniuses who pretty much know everything. Lastly, and this is the one I'm going with despite common sense telling me not to, this particular circus has maned lionesses in the same way that other circuses at the time had bearded ladies. Okay, so that's the first issue. But the first issue is a standalone. The next 5 deal with the storyline we're primarily concerned with. At the start of the story, Batman and Superman rescue a boy, David Sikula, whose story parallels Superman's. He was also sent from his doomed planet by his scientist parents so that he might survive. The difference, he was sent from a parallel world. A parallel Gotham, in fact, rather than from a distant planet like Krypton. Wherever he's from, his cells also process energy from the sun differently. Not in an exact same way as Superman's cells do, but close enough for him to also have superpowers. So Superman takes him under his wing, giving the Man of Steel a sidekick. He is also introduced to the Teen Titans, who christen him Boy Thunder, a play on Boy Wonder, Robin's nickname. And things go well for a while. I mean, David is traumatized, and so retreats into fear more than a hero should. He's also more prepared to resort to violence than either Superman or Batman would like. But that's all understandable. After all, the poor guy has just lost his homeworld, everything and everyone he's ever known. More than understandable, it's solvable. Supergirl went through a similar thing when she first came to Earth and has since become one of its greatest heroes. And David is getting better. He's learning how to work through his fear and is open to doing things Superman's way. So things could have worked out. But as Superman's best-known sidekick is Jimmy Olsen and not Boy Thunder, we know that they don't. The reason is that the villains of the book have yet to make their mark. What villains? Well, fittingly, there's two of them. The first is the Joker. Again, fittingly. What better villain to choose than Batman's archenemy? But the other isn't Lex Luthor. While I admit it would have made a certain sense teaming Batman's greatest foe with Superman's, I'm pleased this wasn't done. Mainly because it's been done before, numerous times, but also because I never thought that the two really work well as allies. Batman and Superman complement each other, each having abilities and resources and outlooks that the other doesn't, and each seeing the value in what the other brings to the table. But Luthor is a meticulous planner, and the Joker is all about chaos. Put those together, and it's just a mess. I don't know whether or not Mark Waid agrees with me on this, but the second villain, the one he chose instead of Luthor, is the key. I realize that this sounds like I'm saying that the second villain is essential or important, that he is the key ingredient to making the book work. No, what I mean is that his name is the key, not as famous as the Joker or Luthor I know, and hence why I felt it necessary to clarify his name. But if you're not familiar with him, let me assure you that he is a formidable foe in his own right, typically going up against not only Superman, but the whole Justice League. And he's been doing this for about 50 years. Again, not the more than 80 years that the Joker's been around, but still pretty impressive. So what's the key's deal? It's hard to condense 50 years into a few sentences, but basically he is a genius chemist who wants to rule all reality, which he thinks he can do if he understands all reality. So he wants to unlock both the secrets of physical reality and the human mind. In pursuit of this, he injected himself with experimental drugs that increased his intellect and opened his senses. The drugs also left him looking like a grey-skinned, skeletal ghoul. And a grey-skinned ghoul is probably a better match for the Joker than Lex Luthor could ever be. Their plan, or part of their plan anyway, is to kidnap David, Boy Thunder, so that they can interrogate him and learn both Batman and Superman's secrets. David is rescued, but being tormented by two supervillains didn't help with his trauma. Before Superman can help him with this, David is whisked to another dimension. It turns out he was still linked to his ship, the one that brought him to Superman's Earth in the first place. They share the same vibrational signature, is the way the book phrases it. And the key has been experimenting with the ship, trying to discover the way to travel to other realities. So David is gone, but it's clear we'll be seeing him again. And we do. About half a dozen issues later, we learn that he was transported to Earth 22, a setting Waid created with Alex Ross when they worked on Kingdom Come together 25 years ago. In fact, David goes on to become the most famous character to debut in that miniseries. Well, he does if you don't count alternate versions of existing characters. I've read some of these issues. Not all yet, as they're still being released, and I've got to admit that I was skeptical of how they would turn out. I'm a Kingdom Come fan, but continuations, sequels, prequels, tie-ins, whatever you want to call them, released 25 years after the originals, seldom turn out well. But I've got to say that I'm enjoying it so far. So, as far as I can see, this series is going from strength to strength. Which is good, because so often these things sort of peter out. So maybe that trade will appear on 2024's list. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about Batman Superman World's Finest. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back, and thanks for watching, and goodbye.